Hello there, dear listener. How are you feeling tonight? Or perhaps it's morning where you are. Is it dusk with a quiet golden sky outside your window? Or maybe the hush of midnight has already wrapped around you like a soft wool blanket. Wherever you are in the world, whether nestled in a city that never sleeps or somewhere gently rural with only the sound of wind and crickets, I hope this finds you well. If you're joining me again, welcome back. If this is your first time here, I'm so very glad you stopped by. My name is Mystroot, and tonight, or this morning, this afternoon, whenever it may be, I invite you to let go. Let the day slip quietly from your shoulders and journey with me into the calm, curious, and oddly comforting corners of history. If you enjoy these softly spoken wanderings through time, do consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps this gentle little corner of the internet reach more sleepy souls like yourself. Now, settle in, perhaps with your favorite blanket or a warm drink, and let us drift together slowly and calmly into another world. Let's drift back to ancient Rome. Not the roaring, fire and sword version of Rome often painted in bold strokes, but a slower, stranger, sleepier Rome. One of quiet courtyards and flickering oil lamps. A world shaped by sandals on stone, the scent of rosemary in kitchen hearths, and the murmurs of everyday people doing very ordinary things. Baking, sweeping, whispering, and sometimes being punished for very curious reasons. But we won't rush there just yet. First, imagine the stillness of a Roman morning. The sun has barely broken over the rooftops. You're standing in a narrow alley, paved with time-worn cobblestones, and the city is only just beginning to stir. Somewhere nearby, a rooster crows, a sacred bird to the Romans, mind you, believed to signal omens and carry whispers from the gods. From one open window, you catch the soft rattle of a woman's hands shaking out cloth. The fabric flutters down like a sigh. A street vendor wheels a cart past, its wooden wheels creaking in rhythm, and from it, the scent of warm bread mingles with olive oil and ash. You step over a sleeping dog curled against a sun-warmed wall, and the stone beneath your feet is smooth, as if centuries have polished it. Rome, you see, was a place of repetition, not just in ritual and rule, but in the daily lives of its people. Over and over again, bakers baked, scribes scratched ink onto wax tablets. Mothers ground barley in stone bowls, and children played knucklebones in the dust. And it is in this everyday rhythm, this soft repetition, that we'll begin to understand the heart of Roman life. In wealthier homes, called domus, the air is cool and shaded. Imagine walking through one now. The floors are mosaicked, tiny colored stones arranged in patterns of sea creatures, flowers, or mythic tales. They crunch very slightly underfoot. The walls are painted with frescoes, gods dining with mortals, dolphins leaping through olive green waves, the occasional languid portrait of a noble woman with knowing eyes. Everything is designed to soothe, to impress gently, never to shout. Curtains made of linen rustle in a faint breeze. An oil lamp flickers on a wooden table, casting soft amber light that wavers like candlelight across the walls. In the kitchen, a servant grinds spices, cumin, coriander, perhaps a touch of dried rose petals. The smell is sharp and comforting. Meanwhile, in humbler Roman homes, life is coarser but no less rhythmic. The family shares one room. Bread is broken by hand. Meals are simple. Barley porridge, olives, a touch of cheese if the gods are kind. Still, there's laughter, there's prayer, there's ritual, Roman society ran on routine. And yes, punishment too. We'll get to that soon. But for now, let's stay with the calm. Let's take a breath here, shall we? A long, slow one. In and out. And imagine yourself lying on a simple straw mattress in a Roman bedroom. The shuttered window cracked slightly to let in the cool night air. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the gentle splash of water from a public fountain. Maybe a flute, faint and wandering. The city never fully sleeps, but it rests. Again, imagine it. The feel of linen sheets against your skin. The way the lamp glows low, like a sleeping firefly. A lullaby in Latin hummed by someone you love. Romans believed deeply in order, in the structure of life, from sunrise to sleep, from birth to burial. But when that order was broken, there were consequences. And those consequences could be strange indeed. You'll see, in time. But first, let's pause here just a little longer in the comfort of daily life. In the rustle of togas, the scratch of ink, the warm scent of crushed time. Let yourself be lulled not just by the sounds, but the shapes. Rounded arches, clay bowls, circles in the bathhouse floor worn smooth by thousands of quiet feet. We'll explore those baths soon, but not now. Now is for stillness, for breathing, for imagining. Again, imagine. An alley cat slipping between clay jars stacked beside a doorway. A child whispering the names of stars she's learned, though they'll vanish with the morning. A Roman father, humming softly as he oils his sandals before a long walk to the Forum. Rome was many things, brutal, grand, poetic, strange, but it was never fully silent. Even in its sleep, it murmured, it dreamed. And tonight, we'll drift into those dreams, one quiet story at a time. And now, with your body a little heavier, your mind a little softer, we continue wandering slowly, dreamily, through ancient Rome, deeper into its curious layers. With each breath, you drift farther from your day, from your to-do lists and your worries, and sink gently into the quiet pulse of a city that lived and breathed thousands of years ago. Let's walk now through the Forum in the early morning. The paving stones are still damp with dew, and faint footprints from sandal soles have left dark trails across the stone. There is a hush here, but also a murmur, the kind that comes before the marketplace stirs to life. You pass a row of statues, worn by time, noses rubbed smooth, names once carved in crisp Latin now softened to ghostly marks. The air smells of crushed laurel leaves, fresh bread baking in clay ovens, and the lingering smoke of yesterday's offerings burned at small shrines. As you move through the square, you begin to notice the structure that defined this world. Rome wasn't simply a place. It was a system, layers of rules, customs, hierarchies. At the top, the senators in their crisp white togas with a subtle purple stripe, speaking slowly, solemnly, always in the tone of men who believe they were history's architects. Beneath them, the equestrians, the old families who once fought battles on horseback and now managed estates. And further down, the common citizens, tradesmen, cobblers, bakers, stonemasons, and their wives who manage homes, raised children, lit lamps at dusk, and prayed quietly to their household gods. There were also the enslaved, many born into bondage, others captured in war, who moved through this society as invisible yet essential threads. Rome moved because they moved, and just as life had its layers, so too did discipline. Punishment was not doled out in equal measure. It reflected your place. The more important you were, the more symbolic your shame. The less power you held, the harsher the sting. This idea of punishment it wasn't always about pain. Often, it was performance. A gesture, a reminder, a whisper through the city's corridors. This is what happens when the order is disturbed. So let us ease into that idea. Let it unfold slowly, like smoke curling from an incense bowl. Imagine, if you will, the quiet humiliation of a man sentenced to sweep the steps of the temple because he insulted a priestess. Not with a broom, no, but with a spoon. Day after day, in silence, bent low, under the watchful gaze of citizens who passed without acknowledging him. The punishment was not violent, but it etched itself into memory. Children pointed, gossip whispered, and the city remembered. Rome had no central police as we know them, no sirens or flashing lights, but it had watchmen and magistrates, and above all, public shame. The Forum was not just a marketplace, it was a stage. Here, a dishonest merchant might be forced to wear a sign around his neck proclaiming his lie. Here, a man caught cheating in dice games would have his name carved into the stone near the latrines. A crude, smelly warning etched into the very walls that bore witness to daily life. Again, imagine it. The slow scrape of chisel against stone, the hush of onlookers, the tremble in the accused's hands as he stands nearby, watching his disgrace become permanent. These punishments weren't about brutality. Not yet. They were about memory, visibility, ritual, and they could be strangely poetic. One baker, caught watering down his dough with poor flour, was sentenced to sleep for a week beside his own oven. The fire had been extinguished, but the scent of ash and old crusts lingered. All night, he lay curled on the floor, listening to the wind whistle through the chimney, the rustle of rats exploring the cooling bricks. Can you imagine it? Not pain, but presence. A forced intimacy with the tools of one's deceit. And so we see that the Romans believed in the shaping of behavior not only through suffering, but through setting, through story. Each punishment was a parable, a lesson embedded in the fabric of the city. And beneath it all, a quiet belief in symbolism. Again and again, this idea reappears that justice should not only correct but tell, that it should echo. If you spoke ill of a Vestal virgin, one of the sacred priestesses sworn to purity, your punishment might involve a public cleansing. You would be led through the streets to a fountain, robed in white, and asked to wash your hands before the gathered crowd, over and over, while a priest recited verses meant to purify both tongue and intention. Water would drip from your fingers. The crowd would watch, silent. And somewhere behind it all, the city would decide whether you were truly clean. These are strange customs, yes, but they reveal a society obsessed with order, with performance, with what could be seen, smelled, heard. The senses mattered. Punishment was not tucked away. It was paraded, and not always with severity, often with ceremony. And so, as we walk slowly through these rituals, you may begin to feel how distant Rome truly was, and yet how familiar. Because we too shape rules around shame. We too remember by retelling. We too believe in consequence, though our stages may be digital now, our forums filled with scrolling screens. But in ancient Rome, it was all very real. And it all happened under the same sky we sleep beneath tonight. The same moon, the same stars. Let us pause here, then, and imagine the hush of a side street in Rome, where a man wearing backward sandals walks in penance, each step awkward, reminding him and others of what was done. The punishment? For boasting too loudly. And so his steps are clumsy backward, humbling, not painful, but unforgettable. Again, imagine sandals scraping stone, passers-by pretending not to stare, the soft laughter of children trailing behind. Rome was strange, but also, somehow, softly human. And as you continue breathing slowly, evenly, let this thought settle in your mind like a falling feather. That even the most powerful city in the ancient world had a quiet, quirky, sometimes beautiful way of reminding people to behave. And we've only just begun. And so, as your breath slows and the outside world drifts a little farther away, let us continue to move softly through the curious shadows of ancient Rome, not in the grand Colosseums or in the loud thunders of conquest, but in the quieter, stranger corners, the places where discipline and ritual touched everyday life in the most peculiar ways. Let your mind stroll now through the dusky halls of a Roman courtroom, not like today's bright and buzzing courts, but dim, echoing spaces with open ceilings where doves cooed from the beams and the smell of old wax tablets, sweat, and parchment ink mingled with the sharp tang of aging marble. The accused stands not behind glass or beside lawyers, but alone, often in a plain tunic, barefoot, his face exposed to the room's soft judgment. There is little shouting, no gavel slamming, only the low murmur of voices and the creak of old wooden benches as the audience leans forward ever so slightly, curious. You see, in Rome, justice was a public performance, but not always a brutal one. It was a lesson meant for watching eyes, a caution woven gently into the rhythm of the city's breath. The punishments, as we've seen, were often symbolic, designed less to injure and more to linger in the mind like a scent you can't quite place. Picture this. A man found guilty of falsifying weights at his market stall is sentenced not to prison. For Roman prisons were not places of long-term punishment, but to carry his rigged scale through the streets while shouting, "I sold lies." A crowd trails behind, some jeering softly, others whispering, but most just watching, quietly, observing, letting the lesson soak into the fabric of their day. It was Rome's way, and not all punishments were handed down from courts. Some came from family, from household authority. In the Roman world, the paterfamilias, the male head of the household, wielded immense power. He could punish, discipline, exile, even sell his own children into temporary servitude. But often, his punishments were subtle. A boy who had misbehaved might be made to wear his tunic inside out for a week, a soft mark of disgrace. A daughter who disrespected her mother might be forbidden from wearing jewelry for a month. Not a violent act, but a visible absence. These were not punishments designed to hurt. They were meant to unsettle, to remind, to gently shape. Imagine, again, the girl's bare wrists where bracelets once glinted in lamplight, the way her friends glance and then quickly look away. That quiet pause, that soft discomfort, was the Roman lesson at work. And then, of course, there were the stranger cases. The ones that make us furrow our brows, even as we feel a strange, drowsy curiosity tug at the edges of sleep. There's a record of a man punished for repeatedly speaking out of turn during public assemblies. He was sentenced to sit in the bathhouse from sunrise to sunset, but fully clothed in his finest garments. Imagine it, hours of steam and heat, while growing heavier and heavier on his shoulders, the scent of sweat and perfume mingling into something cloying and odd, and all the while, citizens passing by with amused glances, shaking their heads, murmuring, "That's what happens to those who can't hold their tongue." Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be corrected without a word being spoken? Rome specialized in that. The city itself became the teacher. The punishment was part of the daily landscape, stitched into the sound of sandals on pavement, laughter in the forum, and the soft splash of a public fountain echoing against stone. There's another curious tale, that of a scribe who was caught altering political speeches in the archives, not for treason, but to make them more poetic. The punishment? He was given a scroll of nonsense verse and told to copy it by hand 100 times, seated in the open square beneath the statue of Cicero. Each day, his hand cramped as the sun arced overhead, and passers-by would glance at the scrolls fluttering in the breeze like forgotten music. Not cruel, not violent, but unforgettable. You see, Rome understood the quiet weight of repetition. The way small acts, done again and again, could carve themselves into the mind more deeply than any scar. Again, imagine the scribe's ink-stained fingers, the scratch of the stylus, the whisper of the wind turning a page over and over. We are reminded that punishment in this ancient city was as much a story as a sentence. Even the animals were not entirely spared. There's a recorded account, likely more ceremonial than literal, of a pig that wandered into a sacred temple during a ritual. The punishment? A public parade through the city, adorned with garlands, followed by a ritual apology read aloud by the temple priest. The pig, of course, knew nothing, but the people did. They watched, they remembered, and they laughed, not cruelly, but with that soft, shared recognition that life, even in Rome, could be strange. As we breathe slowly now, deeper, more gently, let's pause in a shadowed portico as the day begins to fade in our minds. The sky above Rome turns from gold to rose to deep velvet blue, and the lanterns are being lit, one by one, tiny flames dancing in the dusk. Listen closely. The city quiets, the market still, the birds retreat to rooftops. Somewhere, a boy recites his lesson. A mother hums. A magistrate folds away a scroll. And beneath it all, that steady rhythm continues. Life and law, ritual and response, memory and moment. Rome moved to the beat of behavior, gently corrected, softly steered. And as you lie still now, perhaps on your own soft bed, or nestled into your favorite chair with only this voice and the quiet night surrounding you, consider how the world once shaped its people, not just with swords or laws, but with stories. With parades of pigs, backward sandals, tunics worn inside out, and scrolls of nonsense verse fluttering in the wind. It was in its way a lullaby of consequences, whispered through centuries, drifting now toward your ears. So stay with me just a little longer. Let your eyelids grow heavier, your breath slower. We'll walk deeper still into this forgotten theater of gentle punishments and peculiar customs. There's more yet to uncover, but for now, simply rest. And now, as the evening deepens around us and the imagined stone streets of ancient Rome soften in the twilight, let's turn down another quiet corridor of memory, where time moves more slowly, and even the air feels older, heavier, like parchment rolled tight with forgotten stories. We've spoken of the small, strange punishments, of sandals reversed and tunics turned inside out. But now let us gently drift toward those a little more solemn, those that walk the line between ritual and consequence, between spectacle and silence. You see, while the Roman world preferred its discipline visible and theatrical, there were some moments when punishment became deeply entwined with the sacred, especially when the offense brushed against the divine. Religion, in ancient Rome, was not distant, not reserved for temples and holidays alone, but present in every corner of daily life, embedded into kitchen hearths, doorposts, and even the layout of a street. Gods were not abstractions. They were family, ancestors, protectors, and witnesses. And when someone violated this bond, even unintentionally, Rome responded not just with legal proceedings, but with rites. Imagine now a man who failed to pay proper respect to the Laras, the household gods, perhaps out of forgetfulness or fatigue. This was not just a personal lapse. It was believed to affect the very spirit of the home, the warmth of its walls, the safety of its roof. The punishment? Not imprisonment, not a fine, but a quiet rite of reparation. 7 nights sleeping on the floor, facing east with an oil lamp burning beside him. No fire was allowed in the hearth, no food cooked, no songs sung. It was a soft kind of exile within one's own home. Each morning, he would rise in silence and pour a small libation of honeyed milk at the doorstep, whispering a prayer taught to him by the family's oldest member. No one shouted, no one watched, but the ritual spoke volumes. Again, imagine it. The hush of those nights, the flicker of the oil flame casting long shadows on the walls, the stillness of a household in gentle mourning. These were the spaces where Rome shaped behavior with symbols more than shackles. And then there were the Lupercalia rites, odd, ancient, pulsing with echoes of an older world. Part festival, part purification, part punishment. This ritual was held in February and involved young men running through the streets with strips of goat hide, gently lashing those they passed, especially women, in the belief that it promoted fertility and cleansed the city of its lingering sins. It was strange, it was noisy, and yet for the Romans, it held deep purpose. Even those touched by the goat hide strips saw it not as cruelty, but as correction, a soft sting to invite blessings, a reminder that the body was part of the city's rhythm, that life and law danced together in ritual. Have you ever felt the odd peace of an old tradition, something that makes no modern sense, yet carries a hush of meaning in its repetition? Rome lived in that feeling. Again, let us step into another soft moment, the punishment of the tongue. Gossip, slander, false testimony. These were serious offenses, not only because they harmed others, but because they threatened the integrity of the spoken word, which Rome held sacred. Words built contracts, marriages, oaths. To stain them was to shake the city's foundation. And so, a woman found guilty of spreading falsehoods about her neighbor was given a peculiar sentence. For 30 days, she was forbidden from speaking indoors. Only in the open air could her voice be heard, never beneath a roof. It was called silentio tectum, roofed silence. Picture her standing just outside the threshold each morning to greet her children or stepping into the garden to call to her dog. At meals, she would gesture, smile, or scribble a note on wax. The neighbors knew, the city watched, and slowly, the lesson was absorbed, not with violence, but with quiet inconvenience. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to carry your mistake not as a wound, but as a pattern woven into your routine? Rome taught in such ways. The city's wisdom whispered through repetition, not thunder. And for those who disrespected sacred time, who worked during a declared festival or disrupted a public rite, there were punishments meant to slow the soul. A potter once fined for operating his kiln during Saturnalia was sentenced not to jail, but to sit for 2 days beside the temple of Saturn with a cold wheel in front of him, forbidden to touch it. Beside him sat his tools, arranged neatly. Passers-by would nod or murmur. Some would ask, "Why does he not work?" And others would reply, "Because he forgot that time, too, must rest." A soft smile, a slow shake of the head. Rome remembered. It always remembered. Even the city itself punished gently. Buildings were cursed through inscriptions when their owners built too high or too arrogantly. Little stone tablets would be placed discreetly nearby, calling down the displeasure of the gods. Not removed by force, but slowly shamed into correction. Again, Rome reminds us that law need not always shout. Sometimes it whispers. And you, dear listener, growing heavier now beneath the weight of this quiet past, can rest in the knowledge that the world once moved to such thoughtful rhythms. Strange, yes, but not without meaning. The moon rises now above the rooftops. A breeze stirs the olive trees near the Palatine Hill. In some distant street, a flute is played, slowly, softly, perhaps a lullaby, perhaps a prayer. And somewhere, perhaps just in the corner of your imagination, a man still sleeps on his floor beside a flickering oil lamp, whispering his nightly words of apology to a forgotten god. These rituals may seem odd, but they were part of something delicate, a civilization trying to teach itself how to live, how to correct without cruelty, how to balance the scales not with force, but with quiet weight. And as you drift further into this stillness, into this slow tide of memory and myth, you might begin to feel a soft appreciation for the way the ancient world lived its lessons. Not behind closed doors, but in public spaces, in everyday acts, in symbols worn like temporary shadows. Again, imagine, again, breathe, again, let the night wrap around you like a Roman cloak drawn close for warmth. There is more yet to see, but for now, rest your thoughts. Let the sounds of ancient rites and the hush of quiet discipline guide you towards sleep. And so we continue, ever more slowly, ever more gently, walking the shadowed arcades of ancient Rome, where time feels suspended, like the dust that floats in a shaft of lamplight, unhurried, unnoticed, yet always present. As you drift deeper into stillness, I invite you now to imagine not the punishments handed down by courts or priests, but those issued not in words, but in silence, in the slow turning away of a neighbor's glance, in the deliberate pause before a shopkeeper greets you, in the quiet withdrawal of community warmth. For in ancient Rome, as in many old worlds, the sharpest punishment was sometimes social, and it came not from the state, but from the collective breath of the people around you. There was a quiet, heavy weight to being infamous. Infamous, not in the modern sense of scandalous celebrity, but as a citizen whose moral standing had slipped just enough to be noticed and whispered about. You wouldn't be imprisoned, nor exiled. Instead, you would feel the shift in air as you walked the forum. Vendors serving others first, eyes sliding past yours, a child called away from your path by a mother who did not want your reputation to linger like perfume in her child's hair. A baker might still sell you bread, but with no smile. A neighbor might still lend you oil, but without a word. Can you imagine that silence? Can you feel it settle on your shoulders like an invisible mantle, a cloth of unspoken disappointment? This was the punishment Rome reserved for breaches too subtle for courts. Dishonesty in trade, improper mourning, marriages formed too soon after death. It was not law, it was air, and yet, how heavy it was. The truly weary, the ones who sought redemption, would often retreat, not to monasteries, for Rome knew no such thing yet, but to the countryside to a family estate or a quiet farm outside the city gates. There, they would begin a form of penance, both physical and spiritual. Long days spent tending neglected vines, or repairing crumbling walls, or simply walking barefoot on cold ground before sunrise, offering whispered apologies to the Laras, the guardian spirits of the land. Their letters, if any survive, speak not in dramatic flourishes, but in soft regrets. The morning is quiet, one wrote, and I feel the earth answer me. I have not spoken today. I am listening. Again, pause with me. Imagine the dew-wet grass beneath that man's feet, the hush of early birdsong, the clean scent of soil turned by hand. These are not the punishments etched in law, but the ones shaped by time and reflection. They asked no judge for sentence. The world itself became the teacher. And what of the wealthy, those whose status might shield them from most consequences? Rome, always clever, had its methods. For men of high office who brought dishonor through bribery or broken promises, punishment came through public demotion, not in title, but in ceremony. They would be invited still to the great feasts and public games, but seated far from the center, far from the shaded marble seats where the elite reclined. Instead, they sat among scribes and minor merchants, eating simpler food on plain dishes. No one scolded them. No one explained. But every Roman watching understood. You were still there, but smaller. Still fed, but plain. And the world turned around you with just enough distance to remind you of what had shifted. It was called greatest minor, the lesser step. Have you ever felt that kind of distance? Not a wall, but a space. Not a door closed, but a chair moved farther from the fire. Rome knew this well. It shaped behavior with space as much as with speech. And so, as your breathing deepens and your thoughts drift more freely, perhaps you can see now how the city taught its people. Not always with fear, but with form. The spaces they moved through, baths, temples, marketplaces, became soft theaters for quiet correction. A woman who brought shame by wearing mourning garments too long after her husband's death might be required to spend one market day wearing her wedding tunic turned inside out, a reversal of time's fabric. A reminder not to grieve past the rhythm of life. She would walk slowly, basket in hand, her hem fraying inward, and those who passed her would know, but say nothing. For Rome taught through seeing. Again, imagine the texture of that tunic, once smooth with memory, now rough against her skin. The colors faded, the weave familiar. Such punishments did not scream. They whispered, they waited, and they worked. There are even tales, rare but recorded, of symbolic trials held in jest, yet believed to carry weight. One describes a man who routinely insulted poets at public readings. The poets, tired of this, held a mock trial beneath a fig tree in the poets' quarter, complete with scrolls as evidence, and a lyre played out of tune in place of the judge's voice. They found him guilty of crimes against beauty and sentenced him to spend an afternoon reciting bad poetry of his own composition in the public square. And he did. Imagine the scene, a man in his fine toga, standing before amused passers-by, reading verse in awkward meter, his voice faltering, his pride bent just enough to learn. This was Rome, too, serious and strange, graceful and grim, and the city smiled in its sleep. So now, as you lie still, as your limbs settle and your mind loosens its grip on the day, let these images rock gently in your imagination. A fig tree swaying, a scroll rustling in soft wind, a mother pouring honeyed wine into a bowl for a god who may or may not be listening. A man sleeping on the floor beside a guttering flame. These are not grand tales of war or conquest. They are quiet, strange stories, drowsy with ritual, heavy with meaning, perfect for slipping into sleep beside. The hour grows later. The night deepens. And though we have further to go, there is no need to hurry. We walk slowly here. We breathe slowly. Time itself is slow. And in this quiet hour, Rome is no longer stone and ruin. It is breath and dust and dreams. Let us rest here just a moment longer before we take the next step. Let us now ease ourselves back into the soft folds of forgotten time, where the streets of Rome still shimmer faintly beneath the moonlight of imagination, where every shadowed arch and cracked tile holds its own patient story, and where punishment, like everything in the ancient city, was wrapped not just in law but in ceremony, memory, and meaning. Imagine, if you will, the stillness of an early Roman morning, before the clatter of carts and the murmur of the crowd have disturbed the fragile hush. There is a woman standing quietly at the entrance of her domus, her head bowed beneath a pale blue veil. She has not spoken yet today, and she will not for some time, for her voice is bound by a vow made in restitution. 30 days of silence from sunrise until noon, an offering made to cleanse a moment of harsh speech she once let slip in anger. It was not the courts that demanded this, but her household priest, and more deeply, her own heart. And so she speaks only in glances, in hand gestures, in the rustling of her gown as she moves through her home like a breeze through linen curtains. There is no anger here, only reflection, and each quiet morning draws her closer to the peace she lost. Do you see her now, lighting the hearth without a word, placing sprigs of laurel near the threshold, her breath steady, her footsteps light? Such was the way Rome shaped its people, not always with whip or chain, but through rituals that allowed for inner repair. And elsewhere, perhaps just a short walk across the forum, a senator has begun a strange kind of penance of his own. He has wronged a fellow citizen in matters of inheritance, not through fraud, but through delay, a delay that caused a family to lose their land. The law has ruled, restitution paid, but his conscience requires more. And so, for 7 days, he wears a simple woolen cloak, undyed, coarse, the same kind worn by shepherds in the hills. It scratches his skin, pulls at his shoulders, and yet he wears it proudly, walking through the markets, attending meetings, nodding to his peers. Not in shame, but in acknowledgement. There is humility here, but also honor. Rome prized this balance. The quiet dignity of a man who corrects himself not to avoid shame, but to restore harmony. And you, dear listener, might feel the softness of that wool now in your imagination. Smell the earthy scent it carries from countryside winds, and picture the fine sandals that peek out beneath its hem, an echo of wealth wrapped in simplicity. Again, imagine, again, breathe, and again, let your thoughts follow this rhythm. It is slow, it is deliberate, and it is very old. There was, too, a punishment known only in hushed tones, nocturnus service, the night servant. Not a legal status, but a role assigned by certain religious orders for those who transgressed against sacred rites. Offenders, usually young apprentices who mishandled relics or disrespected procession protocols, would spend 10 nights in a temple vestibule, not bound, not beaten, but tasked with watching. That was all, watching. They would sit beneath the oil lamps, facing the sacred inner door, their duty to remain alert until dawn. No sleep, No food until sunrise. No word spoken. And all through the night, the creak of wood, the flutter of doves, the distant barking of dogs would be their companions. These nights were said to be deeply transformative, though difficult. A quiet washing of the soul through sleeplessness and stillness. Have you ever sat quietly through the dark hours, letting thoughts pass like clouds, until even time itself feels vague and wide and slow? That was the intention. Not cruelty, but contemplation. Rome believed that punishment should shift the soul, not just the body. And so, again and again, we see these gentle rituals, this rhythm of rest, reflection, and realignment. Even the natural world was folded into Rome's systems of correction. Farmers who overharvested or disrespected boundaries, cutting grain on festival days, or drawing water beyond allotted hours, were required to make offerings to river nymphs and field spirits. These offerings were simple, woven garlands of wildflowers, baked loaves shaped like the moon, tiny clay figurines of oxen placed beside sacred stones. It was said the land needed to be appeased before it would yield again. So these rituals were not just symbolic. They were believed to realign the seasons themselves. And again we pause, and we breathe, and we imagine. An old farmer, gray-bearded and barefoot, stooping at dusk to place a wreath of thyme and rosemary at the foot of an elm tree, murmuring a song that only his grandparents remembered, his voice low, his hands trembling not from fear, but from reverence. What kind of world was this, where the correction of misdeed was a kind of poetry, a slow unfolding, like a flower opening in the silence of dawn? Rome held space for such things. Even in its harshest laws, there lingered the echo of softness. And so we must speak, gently now, of those laws themselves, not the spectacles of punishment, not the arena or the chains, but the quieter clauses, the ones inscribed in the 12 tables, read aloud in the forum on certain days. One such clause stated that if a debtor could not repay his loan, and if no agreement could be reached, he must appear each third market day wearing a placard around his neck stating his debt. But more than that, he must walk in silence, no begging, no pleading, simply to be seen, to carry the weight not in bonds, but in words. It was both humbling and strangely humanizing, for in that slow walk through the crowd, people remembered their own debts, their own struggles, their own near misses. And many were known to help quietly, slipping coins or favors to ease the burden. So punishment in Rome could become a bridge, not a wall. Again, the city whispers, be slow, be still, be aware. And as you, too, slow your breath and feel the heaviness of sleep drawing near, think of that gentle rhythm. A man walking, a woman silent until noon, a night spent watching a closed temple door. These are not legends meant to dazzle. They are soft patterns, woven into the lives of people not unlike us. People who faltered, who sought repair, who lived through their own quiet seasons of change. And now, as the imagined sky above Rome darkens and the city sinks deeper into slumber, let us remain a while longer in this place of stillness. Let the scents of laurel and dust, the sounds of distant fountains and soft footsteps rock you deeper into the hush. For the story is not over yet, and we have time, so much time. You need only rest, and let the rhythm of ancient lives guide your dreams. Let us stay here a little longer in this quiet twilight of Rome, where torches flicker low and the hush between stories is itself a kind of lullaby. Imagine again the worn cobblestones beneath your feet, smoothed by centuries of sandals, bare soles, and the rhythmic trundle of wooden carts. The breeze carries with it the scent of olive oil and old parchment, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once, then falls silent, as if the night itself has hushed it. Now we turn gently toward the idea of ritualized forgiveness. Not punishment in the way we often imagine, but something softer, older, more rooted in the rhythms of nature and the symbolism of gesture. Rome believed that to correct a wrong, one had to first understand it, then echo it, then release it. This concept, penitentia, was woven into the fabric of both private life and civic order. A man who insulted his father might spend a week serving food to elders at a local temple, not as labor, but as a lesson in humility and age. A woman who stole from her employer might be assigned not to repay in coin, but in storytelling, reading aloud to children in the neighborhood for 10 nights. Her voice is soft balm against the misdeed, her stories weaving new meaning where there had been harm. And these were not dramatic affairs. No announcements were made, no crowds gathered. Instead, Rome practiced a kind of social healing that took place in the quiet folds of everyday life. Have you ever heard the way footsteps sound when you walk alone at night on a marble floor? Soft but echoing, heavy but not ominous. This was the atmosphere in which Rome's more poetic forms of justice were enacted, not through spectacle, but through presence, through repetition, through time. Imagine, then, a young apprentice who misused temple ink, an act seen as disrespectful to the written word, the gods, and the scribes. His punishment? Each morning for 1 month, he was to copy a single passage from the laws of the ancients on a fresh parchment, using careful calligraphy and mindful breath. He would dip the reed pen slowly, deliberately, and each word became an offering, a small act of restoration. The pages were not kept. They were burned in a brazier at dusk, the smoke rising like prayers. This is how Rome mended small tears in its moral fabric, with fire, ink, and silence. Again, breathe deeply. Feel the hush of a cloistered scriptorium, the earthy scent of drying papyrus, the warmth of oil lamps flickering against smooth stone walls. These moments stretch across centuries and invite us not just to learn, but to rest. Not all punishments were human-centered. Some involved the landscape itself. A fisherman who overnetted the Tiber's banks might be required to tend a riverside for 3 full cycles of the moon, clearing debris, planting reeds, watching the herons return. For each day of overharvest, he gave a day of care. No fines, no chains, just quiet restoration. Picture him now, kneeling in the soft mud at dawn, his hands dirty but reverent, placing river stones in neat lines to encourage the current's slow return. It was said that the river knew kindness and would remember it, just as it remembered harm. This belief that the earth itself could forgive was deeply rooted in Roman life. Even a stolen fig could be repaid by planting a new sapling near the garden of the offended. Justice was tactile. It grew from soil. It lingered in seasons. Again, imagine. Can you feel the warmth of sunlight on your back as you dig that hole? The gentle resistance of earth giving way? The weight of something small made right? This was Rome's gentler world, often lost beneath the more familiar noise of conquest and law. And now, as your body grows heavier with rest, your mind quieter, let us walk slowly once more through a ritual known only to a few, Vigilantia Minor, the Lesser Vigil. It was given to those who failed in duty through distraction, watchmen who dozed, messengers who forgot a name, cooks who let sacred offerings burn. Their penance was not cruel, it was presence. They were required to watch something beautiful and remain still. A pool of water in the moonlight, a small flame beneath a statue, a child sleeping. For hours they sat, they observed, they breathed, and in that quiet, awareness returned. This was not punishment as we often think of it. It was a reawakening, a return to attention. Rome believed that mistakes were often born from haste or foggy minds, and so it did not always strike the body. It soothed the senses, reset the rhythm. So too did it understand the value of fasting, not from food alone, but from speech, from motion, from adornment. A vain man might go on week wearing only simple linen, no rings, no scents, no oils. He would greet others plainly and eat alone at dawn and dusk. No music, no mirrors, just silence. The vanity, they believed, would drain out through the absence of praise. And when the week ended, he was invited back into the full richness of life, not with scolding, but with embrace. Rome forgave often. It punished softly. Again and again, it asked its people to try again, to learn. And the learning was slow, ritualized, deeply embodied. It happened through hands, through feet, through breath. You might be asked to sweep a street, not because you dirted it, but because sweeping brings rhythm. You might chant a verse, not because the words were magical, but because chanting calms the breath. Do you see the pattern? Rome believed that correction must include the body, that sleep, even then, was part of healing. Some offenders, particularly young ones, were sentenced not to labor, but to rest. They were placed in cool rooms, fed simple broths, and told to sleep 12 hours a night for 10 days. It was thought that weariness led to carelessness, that the soul, when starved for stillness, begins to slip. And so, sleep was prescribed like medicine, a punishment of slowness, of silence. Can you imagine that? A sentence of rest, a bowl of lentils, a wool blanket, the sound of a fountain just outside your door. Again rest, again silence, and again the world begins anew. As we approach the deeper part of night together, I invite you to let this idea settle in your thoughts. That punishment, when shaped by empathy and rhythm, becomes not torment but transformation. That every wrongdoing can be a doorway, not to fear, but to slowness. That maybe, just maybe, the ancient world knew something we've forgotten, that stillness corrects and kindness endures. Let your breath match the calm pace of this story. Let your eyelids soften. Let the images blur like morning mist. A quiet fire, a man riding slowly, a girl planting a figure. All of it soft, all of it slow, all of it fading into the warmth of sleep. And now, as the ancient stars begin to dim over the dreaming rooftops of Rome, let us linger just a little longer in this quiet pocket of the past, where the air remains warm with lamp smoke and the hush of unspoken prayers, where stone arches catch the last flickers of oil light like pools of memory, and where the soft discipline of the Roman world still echoes through the slow, deliberate routines of those who lived not just to conquer, but to correct, to realign, to quietly return to. Balance. Picture, if you will, an older man in a narrow alley, sweeping dust away from the stoop of a bakery, not his own. His posture is slow, his hands practiced, and beside him sits a basket of rough bread he will offer to passers-by when the sun rises. He was once a wealthy patron who failed to deliver promised flour to this district during a drought. a sin not punished by coin, but by service. He was ordered not by judge, but by counsel, to work among the very people he had neglected, and not in shame, but in humility. Every morning, for 15 days, he rises before dawn and sweeps, hands out bread, nods in silence. Some do not recognize him. Others do and smile. The rhythm restores what no decree could. And again we return to the theme of rhythm, of gestures repeated until they become healing. Think of the scribes who, when they miscopied sacred verses, were not punished with flogging or fines, but asked instead to copy that verse again and again until it entered their memory like a prayer. Each word a brushstroke in the fresco of redemption. Can you hear the soft scratching of reed on parchment? Can you see the flickering light against the curve of the page? The slight tilt of the writer's wrist as he forms each loop and stroke with reverent care? Rome knew the value of repetition. It knew that mistakes were often born not of wickedness, but of haste, of noise, of forgetting. And so it cultivated stillness, not always as a reward, but as a remedy. There was even a term for it, cura per silentium, care through silence. This was often prescribed to musicians, actors, orators, those whose voices were their tools, if they had misused their words to mock or mislead. They would retreat from public life for a season, dwell in quiet countryside homes, refrain from speech during daylight hours. No scrolls, no songs, no applausi. Just the rustle of trees, the breath of the wind, and the long, slow return to sincerity. Have you ever wondered how long it takes for the noise inside us to grow quiet? For our thoughts to settle like silt in water? The Romans believed it took about 30 days. And so, such punishments were not abrupt. They were seasonal. Like rain, like harvest, like sleep. Let us pause here and picture that retreat. An old olive grove, stones warmed by the sun, a man in white linen robes walking barefoot among the trees, whispering not to others, but perhaps to the earth. This was not exile. This was renewal. And yet not all disciplines were so gentle. Some were quietly somber, acts of mourning woven into justice. A woman who spread false news that led to a man's ruin might be tasked to wear mourning garb, gray veils, ash-dusted hands, and stand by the family altar of the wrong for a full moon cycle. She would weep, even if her tears were dry, and tend their household fire as if she had lost her own kin, not punished, but bound to grieve what she had broken. Again, imagine the power of that image. Her shoulders bowed, the quiet rustle of her veil, the scent of burning rosemary and salted smoke rising from the hearth she now keeps. Can you feel how weighty and silent that scene becomes? There are no crowds, no spectators, just two families joined by fire and breath, waiting for the moon to turn. And once it did, forgiveness might be granted. Rome did not rush such things. It allowed space for sorrow to soften. Another common ritual was the offertorium simplex, a practice for minor crimes of selfishness or pride. Those found hoarding food or underpaying workers might be required to host a small public table, offering warm meals to strangers, not from wealth, but from their own hands. A senator might find himself stirring lentils in a pot, serving figs, pouring watered wine. For 1 week, no guards, no speeches, no tokens of status. Just a servant of the people again. This was how trust was rebuilt. Not shouted, not bought, but cooked, served, shared. Have you ever sat across from someone and felt your view of them change as they handed you a warm plate? This too was Rome. Not just the empire of swords and statues, but the quiet empire of gestures, of weaving wrong and right back together over a fire. Even children were guided by soft hands. A boy who broke a neighbor's vase in anger might be asked not to pay, but to paint. He would decorate a new one, slowly, brush by brush, under the gaze of the local potter. Every afternoon for a week, he would return, his fingers smudged with ochre and clay, his brow furrowed in care. And when the new vase was finished, he would carry it in both arms and deliver it to the one he wronged. Not just replaced, but restored. The act carried weight. And later in life, he would remember not the scolding, but the stillness. The scent of paint, the steady hand. Rome taught through doing, through remembering, through patience. Again we breathe. Again we imagine. Now, as our shared night deepens, let us think not just of punishment, but of balance. Rome understood that every transgression rippled outward, not just through law, but through spirit, through story, through space. And so, in many homes, there was a simple tradition. Before sleep, each member of the household would speak one thing they regretted and one thing they wished to do better. It was not confession. It was reflection. The eldest would nod. The youngest would listen. A candle would be snuffed. And sleep would come not as escape, but as closure. Do you have such a ritual in your life? Have you ever spoken aloud your own missteps, softly in the hush before dreams? Is healing in its way? Rome knew this, and now you know it too. So let your mind drift with the scent of figs and firewood. Let your breath match the rhythm of old prayers whispered by stone walls. Let each story settle like dust on ancient shelves. You are safe here in this cradle of memory. You are still, you are slow, and the city sleeps with you. And so now, dear listener, as we settle into the final stillness before the hush of farewell, let us turn once more to the deeper waters of Rome's quiet soul. Not its armies or emperors, not its politics or palaces, but the unseen stream of emotions, customs, and forgotten rituals that flowed beneath it all, shaping how the Romans felt, forgave, and found their way back to balance. In the quiet hours after night had fallen and the city's energy dimmed, many Roman households gathered around small altars or hearths, not to worship gods with ceremony, but to whisper to them in thanks or thought, their words soft as moth wings against the ear of time. It was believed that spirits of the ancestors, the Lauras and Penates, dwelt within the home, watching not with judgment, but with gentle attentiveness. And if one had done wrong, not only to others, but to themselves, they might offer a handful of flour, a smear of honey, a cup of milk placed by the flames, not as punishment, but as a promise. I will do better. I will be more present. I will remember. Can you see it now? The small hand of a child placing a fig on a terracotta dish, their mother kneeling beside them, whispering a name long gone, and the candle beside them flickering as if nodding in agreement. Rome's concept of justice was so often intertwined with memory, not simply to forget wrongdoing, but to remember in a softer way, to allow a moment to reshape itself within the ritual of daily life. Even in the public baths, where gossip and news mingled with steam and water, there were quiet codes of humility. If one had lost their temper earlier in the day, they might leave a small olive branch on the changing bench as a signal, silent but understood. I was wrong. I am sorry. Let the water wash it away. No shouts, no confrontations. Just gestures. So many gestures. Rome, for all its grandeur, moved on a choreography of meanings so subtle they could only be felt in stillness. Again, pause and breathe. Think of that. How healing can begin in silence, in softness, in simple presence. A senator might be sentenced not to stand trial, but to walk barefoot through the forum at dawn, his purple hem left behind, his sandals tucked away, a citizen again among citizens. There would be no mockery, only the silence of shared understanding. And at the fountain, he might stop, offer coin to a beggar, take the cup in both hands, and drink. And in that moment, balance returned. Rome prized this rhythm, that each transgression had a mirror act of humility. It was not always exact. It did not seek symmetry, but sincerity. The wrong needed only to be met by presence, by intention, by time. The sick were not punished for falling ill. The angry were not punished for feeling fire in their bellies. But if they lashed out, if they caused pain, they were invited into stillness. A potter might break their own wares in a fit of rage, and their neighbors would not rebuke them. Instead, they would bring him unshaped clay and leave it at his door, as if to say, begin again. Make beauty again. You're still needed. That was Rome's quiet compassion, the belief that no one, not even the wrathful, was beyond redemption. And so even their prisons were not built for eternity. Most were temporary, holding places while reparations were planned. And those held within were often given tasks, not cruel, but mindful. One might tend olive trees behind the forum. Another might recite poems to the children of the city's scribes. Again, we see how Rome blended the sacred with the ordinary, the poetic with the pragmatic. There was an unspoken rule among magistrates that no punishment should be so severe that a man could not one day sit beside his peers and laugh again. And so when sentences ended, there were rites of return, small processions, shared meals, embraces. Forgiveness was not a private affair. It was communal. The wound belonged to many. So too did the healing. Have you ever felt that warmth when someone wronged is ready to welcome you back, not with pride, but with patience? Rome believed in that warmth. It stoked it like a fire, letting it build slowly, gently. And in the temples dedicated to Concordia, the goddess of harmony, there were often benches not for worship, but for conversation. Disputes would be discussed there, yes, but so too would apologies be offered, and not with force, but with eyes lowered, with gifts of grain, with songs. Yes, songs. A tailor who had cheated his patrons might be asked to sing the praises of his competitors, aloud, in the marketplace, for 1 week. His voice would waver, perhaps, but over time, steadiness would return, and shoppers would listen, and trust, oddly enough, would bloom again. Rome was a city that believed even the voice could be taught to heal. Again, pause. Again, listen. Even now, beneath your resting breath, can you feel the slow rhythm of those stories, those soft punishments, those tender repairs? They're like threads woven gently through your own thoughts, inviting you to consider, not judgment, but understanding, not shame, but reentry. Imagine now a woman who has spoken cruelly in a moment of pain. She carries her guilt like a pebble in her sandal, unseen but ever present. Her neighbor, having heard the words but knowing her heart, invites her not to explain, not to excuse, but to sit beside her and shell peas, silently, for the evening meal. And in that shared work, the wrong dissolves. No speech needed, just time, just hands moving together, just food prepared and forgiveness formed in the folds of quiet labor. Rome knew that forgiveness was not always declared. Often it was grown, tended like basil in a cracked clay pot on a sunlit sill. And now, as you lie still, listening breathing, slowing. Let these images soften the weight of your own day. Let the scent of olives and smoke, of parchment and pressed figs, drift across your thoughts like low clouds. Let your own regrets dissolve like ink in warm water. Let your heart slow its pace to the rhythm of footsteps on ancient roads, to the flick of broom on stone, to the hush of a mother's lullaby murmured to her sleeping son in a villa near the sea. The city sleeps. The punishments are done. The lessons are folded gently like worn tunics and placed beside the fire. You are safe. You are forgiven. And tomorrow, like in ancient Rome, you may begin again. And now, as the candle flickers low and the city of ancient Rome fades softly into the hush of memory, let us lie back and breathe together, letting go of the weight of time. You've walked through marble courtyards and narrow alleys, lingered in temples and taverns, watched bread rise and braziers glow, seen punishment not as pain, but as pause, a slowing down, a coming back to oneself. The voices of the past have grown quieter now, and the dust of centuries settles like silk across your thoughts. The streets are empty. The olive trees no longer rustle with debate. Even the statues seem to sleep, draped in shadows, their stone gazes turned inward. You are alone here, but not lonely. Instead, gently surrounded by echoes that no longer demand attention, but simply remain soft and still, like folded linens on a shelf, or like a dream half remembered. Let your breath deepen as we float one last time through the mosaic of this distant world. Imagine the domus of a modest Roman family, nestled on the Palatine Hill, where a mother hums quietly as she combs her daughter's hair. There's no urgency. The window is open, and the lavender on the sill moves just slightly in the night breeze. Down the hall, the father has fallen asleep with a scroll still unrolled in his lap. Outside, a servant gently douses the courtyard torch with water. Steam rises, soft and slow. From every doorway in Rome, there now leaks only silence. No judgments, no sentences, no voices raised. Only the slow turning of thoughts. Only the breath of the city in sleep. And beneath that stillness, there's something more, a knowing, perhaps, that no matter how far we travel through history, we are never very far from ourselves. We all forget. We all repair. We all long to be seen not just for our failings, but for our efforts. That is the most human thing. And Rome knew this. Again and again, we've seen it. In the baker sweeping the steps he once neglected, in the child offering a fig at the altar, in the quiet songs of a tailor speaking his truth in the square. Justice in that ancient place was not about perfection, it was about balance. And as your own breath grows slower, longer, softer, allow that truth to settle in your bones like warmth. You're not asked to be flawless. You're asked to return, to try again, to be still long enough to listen, to others, yes, but also to yourself. And so here we are, you and I, at the end of this quiet walk through time. Our path winds back through olive groves and broken columns, past frescoed walls and sleeping animals, through markets emptied and fountains stilled. The moon is high above the Tiber now, casting silver ribbons across its black surface. If you listen closely, you might still hear footsteps in the forum, the soft soles of a philosopher's sandals, the hesitant scuff of someone coming back home, humbled. But those sounds are fading. The gates are closing. The lamps are dimmed. Even at night, watchman leans on his staff and drifts into dreams. You've listened long and well. and the stories now rest in your mind like pages of a worn book, gently bookmarked by the slowing of your heart, the lengthening of your breath. There's no need to remember every detail. Let them blur. Let them blend. That, too, is the way of sleep. The names and punishments and people may fade, but the feeling will stay. The softness, the slowness, the sense that even in a world of harsh emperors and sharp laws, there was still room for kindness, for quiet, for the hope of return. Perhaps tomorrow you will think of one moment from tonight, a candle flickering in a temple, or a pair of hands shaping clay into apology. Or perhaps you'll remember nothing at all and only wake with the faint comfort of having traveled far without ever leaving your bed. And that, dear listener, is more than enough. For now, let your thoughts wander where they will. No need to follow them. Let them drift like petals on water, circling once, twice, then disappearing into dream. The world is quiet now. Your room, your breath, your body, everything rests. And I, your gentle Mystroot, will step back now. My voice too grows soft and distant and still. But know this, I will wait for you in another time, another place, with another slow story to tell, one made of dust and dreams and human hands. Until then, sleep well, rest deeply, and dream kindly. I'll see you in another timeline. Good night.